Welcome back, folks, to episode 132 of the Running Man Self-Regulation Skills Project podcast with me, your host, Dr. Armando Dominguez, PhD in health psychology, licensed professional counselor, and an adjunct professor at a local community college. And what we're going to be discussing today has to do with play as learning, and also moving towards the new year, we want to be able to consider the fact that play isn't just for children, and growth and learning often, whenever we're happy campers, tends to be easier whenever there's less of a threat to learning, and whenever failure is allowed, but it doesn't become an absolute in the sense I identify as a failure because I failed at doing something, but also using that as a scaffolding, as a step off into the new year. It's going to be the 1st of January here very soon. Today is the 29th. And the reason I want to talk about this is because there is much that I've done this past year and many years in the past looking back that have been step off into the next step, the next level, the next journey, and the next goal. And these are things that going into the new year, people often wait to do a New Year's resolution. I personally don't believe in making New Year's resolutions. Sometimes it's just a matter of resolving to do when it's time to do. Once you set a worthy goal or find out what it is that you want to do and starting with the end in mind, so to speak, we don't worry about the middle. The steps work themselves out logically if we move in that direction. With every step moving in that direction, not unlike Socrates said, you will get to where you've got to go. So how do you find Mount Olympus? Every step must move in the direction of Mount Olympus. How do we achieve a goal? Well, play is one way to get there, and it will allow us to gain skill. We'll talk a little bit about neuropsychology and mirror neurons and how that kind of helps and plays along a very important role in how we develop and how that can help us make 2026 a wonderful year. To kick off this conversation, I want to start off with the idea of children. And whenever children, infants, and even babies, neonates, whenever they're freshly out of the womb, let's say fresh out of the plastic and still got that new baby smell, and we are always in the process of gaining information and learning. And some very important neuronal structures that we have found is that of the mirror neuron that we recognize that has a lot to do with how we sense environment and perceive what it is that we're looking at largely, and determining what an action is so that we can repeat that. I've mentioned this experiment that a person did on video many years back, a psychologist who had a brand new baby, and mama was still on the delivery table, and baby was literally less than a minute old, and he had a compatriot with a camera recording over his shoulder as he did the tongue sticking out action in front of baby, and he was holding baby in the little cone head swaddling and everything and holding him in both hands, and baby's little eyes were open, but then baby started repeating the action. That means that baby learned. The baby vicariously learned. Baby learned by observation and repeated behavior. This is powerful. Now, this is something that we all do, and this is something that we do rather clumsily when we're like 12 and 13 and trying to fit in and dress like everyone else and belong and be part of the group, and that's kind of an extrapolation of this idea. In that we see people act a certain way, we hear people talk a certain way and use expressions, and we try to find and shape that identity that we're going to be. So that's a flexion of this learning capacity, this observational learning that has a very distinct social tie that gives us social value and gives us a sense of identity whenever we're trying to find who it is that we are as a person, not that we're looking at the identity of the sexual dimorphism, not that at all, but finding out who it is as a person that I am, what my likes are, do I like these things, what my preferences are, what my interests are, this sort of thing. Now, the mirror neuronal structures, what they do is they give us a feel for what it is that a person is doing. You've probably seen people whenever y'all were children, if you look back to whenever you were a kiddo, if you're an adult right now, or maybe if you are a kiddo and you see somebody skateboarding, or maybe they're riding a scooter, maybe they're doing a certain step over cartwheel without hands, this sort of thing. And those are things that you want to emulate because they look cool. And we try to do those things. Cartwheels are fun. And we might want to do something like skateboarding. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy, but somebody doing that, we see the entirety of this picture in our mind of somebody gracefully riding the skateboard. As I'm doing this, I'm actually miming my hands out and squatting downward while I'm doing that, just thinking about it, trying to emulate the picture in my own mind, but thinking about how smooth and graceful they are whenever they're maneuvering that skateboard and hugging the curves of a sidewalk and that sort of thing. We have a sense of affinity, and there is a payoff there. There's some dopamine happening there, and that we see, and it's like, oh, that's exciting. And then we want to do, and there's this desire, and some would actually dirty this idea up whenever we start saying, oh, that's envious, I want to have that. And there's nothing wrong with having a healthy sense of envy or jealousy. There's something wrong with that. But often wanting to do what someone else does is normal. To be able to not just have what someone else has and take from them and leave them less, that's theft, but rather to emulate and acquire a skill that looks joyful. There's a sense of feel in a vicarious learning situation that was identified by psychologists and monkeys that were seeing doing things, and other monkeys were doing them, and then they saw what they were doing and they were able to emulate and do. And nobody said, hey, don't do that. That's my action, or that's my way of washing the sand off of sweet potatoes. Don't be doing that. And then we even see that in the 100th monkey effect. That's a much more, I would say, esoteric development having to do with transfer of information. But in a more practical sense, watching others do what they do helps us develop into the persons that we will become. And who knows, maybe we'll be naturally more talented at what it is that we're picking up. Or maybe we may fall and fail a few times, and that's okay too. But whenever we have this sense of vicarious learning, observational learning, there is a good feel to that. And then we might even research a little further and find out all the minutiae about it in details. Some of us have to gather information before we do things. Some of us have to look at it from every angle before we try to get a sense or feel, in quotes, of what it is that's required before we venture our own body into the action of trying to copy or emulate that activity. Now, why is this important to learning? Because this has a lot to do with what occurs in play whenever we're little, when we're young, and it's a very powerful learning experience. You don't necessarily have to have a formal teacher to teach you how to do things in all skills. Now, there are some skills that do require a teacher, and you may be able to emulate a large degree of skill, but much of the understanding and minutia and detail, if you're doing something along the lines of ballet or even gymnastics that require virtuosity and amplitude of action and control of certain muscles in certain orders to be able to get a said result, and there's an aesthetic that you want to get out of that, we may be able to emulate those things by kind of learning those things on our own, but not all of it. Now, there is some that we do get skills from by just observing that we're able to either emulate it and get better. And to use a martial arts example, Bruce Lee was known to have been a prodigy in learning. That his top student that's currently still alive, that's Mr. Dan Inosanto, and he was the one that has carried on the legacy of Jeet Kune Do, Bruce Lee's development of the martial art. And Bruce Lee studied many things, but he was an academic studying very deeply into systems, strategies, this sort of thing, but he was very physically talented in being able to emulate actions, and often was shown one thing and he would work on it. The next time they reported that they would see them, they were not only as good as equal to the person that taught them, but in many cases better. He was able to figure these things out. So the neuronal structure, the mirror neuron, can actually allow us a lot of skill in learning in a short period of time. One-shot learning, and octopus learning is much like that as well, in that they learn in one shot, often because of the size of their brains, but also the amount of neuronal structure that they have that allows them to take in information in large chunks that helps them pick up skills much more effectively, much more quickly than your average bear, so to speak. But back to the mirror neuronal structure, and Bruce Lee, whenever he was learning, if he was able to emulate a skill and then do it better than you the next time, so to speak, that you saw him after having taught him, then that means that he was learning at hyperspace speed, which is amazing and exciting, but not all skills are learned that quickly. Most people don't remember that whenever people have gone into his life, the details of him, he actually was very nearsighted and wore glasses because he needed help with glasses to be able to see what he was doing at a distance. He could read up close, but also he had one leg shorter than the other, a full inch shorter. That's why he leaned on using that one leg for doing his powerful sidekick to the left, I believe. But he didn't let those things limit him. There were also some things having to do with him having a case of mild epilepsy, one that would cause him to have a seizure that would cause him to blank out, but not necessarily in the grand mal sense. But many people didn't know this about him, but yet he overcame these details and what we would call shortcomings that many people have less of a limitation, but yet they still allow themselves to be limited in their learning and their skill gain. There are many things that we do in a life, and it doesn't have to be martial arts necessarily, but that was just a good example, by the way, but that we can use the idea of scaffolding whenever we're learning, basically training wheels. And it doesn't mean you're a baby when you're learning, but there are times whenever having support's okay. Whenever we start a new job, often you have an orientation that's supposed to provide you some scaffolding or training wheels to be able to get around wherever it is that you're working and know procedures, that sort of thing. And then you have support where somebody teaches you what it is that you need to do with the foundation of whatever education may be required for doing tech work, for instance, or anything along the lines of mechanic work. So you know that there's a certain way of doing things that they expect a level of quality. So there's a learning curve there. But the important thing is that whenever we are learning, if there is a sense of threat, it tends to shut down our higher brain in the sense that we become very narrow-minded, in the sense that not that you don't believe anything that's being told of you, but we tend to grasp onto things like a steel trap, and we tend to overhold them. We don't hold on loosely in a flexible sense. We hold it tight, and we may not let it go, and we take it as sacrosanct. We take it as this sanctified bit of knowledge handed down by the gods of the electric wrench, and then they handed it to the mechanic that taught you this sort of thing. And that's not how things should be. We should be able to be flexible in response, not only in a physical sense, but also in a mental sense in how we problem solve. Not all things that we look at are failures or problems. Those have negative connotations, but they're challenges and obstacles sometimes to a goal, getting this car fixed, for instance. And if we see things as a puzzle or as a solution requiring an equation so that we know what's going on in the middle, then that's okay too. Sometimes we have to creatively look at things and sometimes just wondering, well, we'll see what we run into, and being open to what we find and not being resolved to having the decision or an adjudication about something's being good, bad, or whatever before we even start. Often whenever there is fear, there's a fear of loss. We may have a fear of loss of stature or social value, and many times we will not allow ourselves to be creative in our response, creative in our seeking, in our searching, and we lose a sense of adventure, discovery, and wonder. And those are the things that drive our kiddos. Have you ever seen a little baby that is maybe a year and a half, 2 years old, and they look at everything and they ask questions once they're able to talk? And if not, they touch everything, they put things in their mouth. It's with their feet, their hands, their body. They put their tummies on it, they roll over, and they're getting this sensorium, this overload of information to make sense of what it is that they're doing in whatever unstructured way we would call it of learning, if we were looking at it in a regressive sense from where we're at now versus where I used to be, and realize they're actually pretty efficient. It's maybe not a regression, but maybe a progression of learning, because they're learning how to use more muscular control, stand up, walk around, look around, and they start getting a sense of depth and also a sense of time elapsed in the sense of it and what it feels like, but not time on the clock. I can tell time. That's a mathematical linear process, but rather getting that sense once again of what time feels like and waiting feels like. And our demonstration of those things, kids will do as we do before they'll ever do as we say. And even when they learn to speak and understand, they're probably going to do what we do versus what we tell them anyhow. So it's probably something we need to get used to. Doesn't mean that they're going to be belligerent, rude, and consistently being obstinate. Some might be, but I laugh because that's not funny, but rather it's curious because often, we all have our obstinate states wherever we get to a point. It's like, no, I don't want to do this. And sometimes it's too much information that's occurring. Maybe we don't have enough information. Often if we have an emotional load, if we have a kiddo that's withdrawing, and let's think about this, maybe we have an adult that's withdrawing from a communication. Higher energy, raising your voice and getting intense and bugging your eyes out does not necessarily make your case better. And it doesn't mean that because you're saying things louder that what you're saying is more convincing. That's physiological intimidation. That's environmental change that does not help your case. Sometimes whenever someone is shutting down, the best thing we can do is to mirror. The mirror being we want to reflect what they're reflecting to us because they're showing us too much. And if we're showing them that we withdraw as they're withdrawing, it will give them space and sometimes letting them know, hey, I'm here if you need me. And that's the scaffolding that they can step over to or the training wheels, you want to call it that, to come over and use if they feel the need. But pushing a communication when things shut down doesn't always necessarily make for the best communication. Often understanding that whenever a kiddo is going high energy and dysregulated, we have to be the centered one, not raising your voice, not being louder, not standing up and standing over them and being intimidating in that sense, because you are. You don't want to be physically intimidating, but sometimes just talk to them calmly, and you want to entrain them. You want them to get to follow what it is that you're doing. You're the lead. Sometimes you have to arrive and be the center. And this isn't only with children, but sometimes with adults too. Somebody's raising their voice, staying calm and not looking down on them and look at them like you're judging them, but rather confronting somebody does not require you jumping in their face necessarily, but meeting them sounds better. It doesn't sound like a fight or the beginnings of a fight. And talking to them in a tone that is one reassuring and arriving in a body language state that is one bladed to the edge and not necessarily facing your center to their center, especially if they're agitated. There are numbers of things that we have to do to help self-regulate and also encourage our chance of increasing our successes and minimizing our failures. Sometimes when we run into people, we do these things and we do so in a hurry, and we tend to forget that sometimes too much in a hurry is not a good thing. Too much information. If their brain is getting shut down and their heart rate's going up and we're asking too many questions that require thinking, that's probably not the best time. Then we're going to overwhelm them. If we move in too closely, that's probably going to overwhelm them. If we come in too loudly and doing all those other two things at the same time, we're probably going to overwhelm them and get an outcome we don't like, and they may strike out, get irritated, or they may elevate and escalate their state and get loud, or maybe even run away or shut down even further. So we don't want to encourage such things. And this isn't just with children. Sometimes in meetings, people get offended. Some people get uncomfortable being around other people. Anxiety, we have to take into consideration. Success isn't always about what I'm doing and how I arrive and what my goals are and my strategy and what my end goal is going to be once I'm done with this presentation, but rather seeing and feeling what it is that I'm entering into: environment, boardroom, classroom, or the space that somebody else is occupying to communicate. Let's say a bedroom that you want to talk to your children in, or maybe even a living room whenever you're doing homework with them or wanting them to do homework. This sort of thing. And notice I'm kind of rambling at a tone and pace that is kind of like a chain that continues. And I'm doing that on purpose because I'm kind of demonstrating how sometimes the talk can entrain you and get you to follow as well without any specific stops and starts. Now, why did I do that? One is the mirror neuronal structures. Whenever we see somebody moving and talking, there are certain inflections that occur. We pay attention to that. And those changes in what we would call relatively normal behavior don't have pauses between them whenever they're pressured. And I kind of demonstrated a little bit of what pressured speech might sound like without necessarily elevating my voice, and also speeded up language delivery, which maybe is more about unloading all the information because there may be anxiety building up. And I'm trying to give you as much information as possible to help you understand, because I might need help regulating this. And I may be saying that with how my state is versus saying it intentionally, because then I would be admitting failure or worse, loss of control, loss of self-regulation. Now, why is this important? The important thing is that whenever we're moving forward, into the new year, we have to realize that we've overcome a lot and we've learned a lot of things. And my question to you, and this is a rhetorical question, I want you to ask yourself, quietly, don't tell anybody, you ask yourself this. What have I done this year to improve my capacity to regulate myself, my emotions, and how I arrive? What are those things? Have you been able to use self-regulatory skills to improve the quality of communication? Maybe even the quality of the work that I put out whenever I'm by myself, being able to regulate that sense of stress. What goes on in my mind? Do I overstress myself because of the way I frame things in my mind? Oh, this is not going to turn out well. Oh, I'm terrible. I feel terrible. I don't want to do this. I don't have a sense for, or I'm not creative, and I don't want to do this or that. And then we start to self-deprecate. Have we stopped the self-talk that is negative? Have we encouraged ourselves to say, hey, you know what? I know I'm feeling like this today. And maybe even laughing at ourselves a little bit, not laughing at yourself because you're a laughing stock, but rather laugh and realize that, no, I've done this before. And recognize that, it's okay. It's okay to start over. And you're not starting from zero. You're starting from experience. And starting from experience tells you, well, I've done this before, and last time this didn't work as well. Let me try this instead. And it starts from experience, starts from not zero, but from a point of choice in the new moment moving forward. And going into the new year, what are you changing today? What have you changed this past year that's going to help you glide into the new year in a more successful way, in a way that you can gain more quality of life, more quantity of life, of quality things, of course, and happiness, general sense of relaxation. What have you done to help manage your health in a sense that you carry less stress around, that you perceive things in a way that they're not interpreted through the lens of stress or worry or fear? Have you done things to help improve those things? And if so, what I'm telling you is that this podcast is an amazing resource. I do like the podcast myself, that I even refer back to just to remind myself of these ideas, and I practice. Now, self-regulation skill is something that I think that we can all benefit from. And I will tell you that there are many people, and this is the lament on the internet, it's the lament on television, it's the lament in the communities that we hear, that we have people always upset and they're arguing, they don't get along. And there are all these fears being mongered by media out there that they want us to fear and worry, and there's no resolution. I was speaking to somebody today that even in entertainment, in the movies we're supposed to enjoy, the heroes don't emerge at the end of the movies. There's very little hopeful story the way we used to see and hear in the movies during the 80s. And that wasn't some sappy, happy that all things are going to turn out right all the time. It was not like that, but rather that there's this sense of lingering, structured failure, in the sense that we're always going to be stuck with this downtrodden, this sadness, this upset, and this challenge of something that's unknown, that we don't know what it is, but it's stressful to me and it could be dangerous to me, or it could be bad, or it's not good for sure. And to leave something like that hanging is a suggestion. Whenever you go to a movie, there's a lot of emotional charge, but there's a lot of potential to be entrained, to be psychologically manipulated, to kind of leave the sense of expectation open, but not necessarily for good or for hopeful things. So moving forward into the new year, let's become more aware of what we consume. Let's become more aware of the fact that self-regulation skill, if we have children, starts when we're little by emulating those things, by talking to our kiddos. Teach them those breathing exercises because they're fun. They are fun to do whenever you do things. Make it silly, make it fun, make it playful, but do it in a way that they learn how to use it whenever things are easy, scaffolding. And then whenever things get harder, remind them, hey, remember that breathing exercise? It works here too. And suggest to them. Don't tell them you have to do this. But if you tell them and they like the coaching, and if you're teaching them like I've taught my sons whenever I've taught them martial arts, tell them this is when this works. This is when this works. And I let it go. And what is funny is that years later, they tell me, I remember I use this whenever this happens. Whenever I'm stressed at work, I've used this and this works. And whenever they tell me, you taught me this, and sometimes I've forgotten the conversation that rooted or seeded that within them, but yet they were able to repeat it to me and they've used that. And Dr. Glenn Morris, I mention him a lot, the late Dr. Glenn Morris in his Path Notes book talks about monkey see, monkey do. And then whenever we're talking about our kiddos, monkey sees and thinks about it. So we seed things and we plant with hopes of germination and growth, and those things will flower If you teach them good things, sometimes the teaching isn't just the verbalization, telling them, but it's the modeling, the vicarious learning, and firing those mirror neurons in them so they get the feel of what it is we're demonstrating. And they learn quicker that way. They ask questions that way. And when it's time to ask questions, they will. And whenever they start to differentiate and run away from dad and mom and say, no, I don't want you. And then later on, whenever they get older, they come back, they return, and they will tell you the most wonderful things sometimes. And those things are the things that you taught them because they were so important to you, not because you wanted them to elevate you in some way, but because you were teaching them survival skills. You were teaching them how to make it out there whenever parents aren't going to be there to coddle them, to give them scaffolding, or to be their training wheels. Whenever life was going to be difficult, you gave them thinking skills and feeling skills and gave them a measure of regulating themselves so they do not get themselves from the frying pan into the fire. So let's look back and think about how we were prepared. And we may have had good preparation, we may have had bad, and we may have learned our preparation from somebody at school, a teacher. Where do we get our signals to learn how to be better and overcome? Those are good questions to ask yourself. And if you know that your kiddos are going to go to public school, for instance, and we can't control every interaction throughout their life, what are we going to give them and seed in them that's going to help them become not only more flexible in response, but more intelligent and more resilient generally? And that way they don't fall and fail because of a sense of entitlement. I've arrived, pay me, and then realize, the world doesn't work that way and they're not going to pay you because you're good looking or cute. And I still remember my parents asking me, what do you want me to do? Do you think I'm going to buy this with my good looks? And that always didn't make sense to me, but it made sense to me much later, realizing, I can't just arrive and just whip a smile out and there you go. You're going to give me merchandise. It doesn't work that way. But what I will tell you is that there is a large measure of preparation that we go through in life and that we've gone through in life whenever we're being prepared by those that were our parents or those that are parenting figures or maybe even our coaches or even those mentors that we sought to learn from, especially learning a skill that we wanted and we wanted to emulate those things. And maybe we picked up good behaviors. We have to realize, too, that we have to separate the information from the deliverer of that information. A lot of people are great mentors, but they have terrible lives and terrible habits that we don't want. We don't want to become an alcoholic or a drug addict because we emulate some musician's way of playing because they're amazing. They may be. Take the skill. Yes. Leave the addiction. Leave the bad aspect. You don't have to take that to be a good guitarist. So understanding where the knowledge is and separating it from the person, it's okay. Learning how to become great is okay, but it doesn't mean you have to become a flaming dumpster fire wreck in your life. Don't have to do that. Wisdom is a good thing. So what I'm wanting to do is just really encourage you going into 2026. This is the end of 2025. I know I waited a little bit to put this out, but I also want to tell you thank you for listening all of 2025. And for those of you that have been listening since 2023, 2.5 years ago, we're still moving. I know I had to kind of put the video interviews on a shelf for a little bit because I am working on finishing up the book, and I certainly look forward to putting that out into print soon, and I will let you know when that happens. But what I'm going to tell you now is that I encourage you to do your best to regulate yourself and grow, to learn as much as you can, and take in as much information as you need to do what you got to do. Give yourself some grace when learning. Realize that failure isn't permanent and you are not a failure. We don't identify by that. That is merely the result of an activity, and we don't learn without falling. We don't learn without tripping. We don't learn without failing, and failure is just a transient state, just like an exhale and an inhale. An inhale is successful drawing in of oxygen. An exhale is not a failure of oxygen because I couldn't keep it. It's been a transformation to wherever we now are leaving carbonic gas and letting it go, and we need to do that. It's necessary. So failure is very necessary to learning how to become much more successful, to become much better at the things that we want to get good at. And I encourage you to do as much. And encourage those loved ones that you have to learn. Pay attention to our kiddos. They're amazing learning devices for parents. But if you're a kiddo, you are amazing. And if you used to be one, hey, you're still amazing. And I want to tell you thank you for your patronage and listening. And please continue to share this podcast. I want to see it grow. And if you want to see this podcast on YouTube, go to Running Man Get Skills Project. It is in YouTube. It's on Amazon. It's also on Spotify. And I know this is running a little long. We'll tell you if you have any kind of feedback, send it to the email at runningmangetskillsproject@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. And for now, learn well, walk well, take care.